Okay, Huan. This is the YouTube link, or you can get it from Zoom itself. Christy's about to join this.
Okay, Dorothy's not here yet, so I'm just gonna update this before I do the email stuff.
Dorothy's here.
Oh, Dorothy, can you update the card and I'll do the email right now?
Yeah.
Okay. And just know that everything that we're saying in here, that it's going on YouTube right now. And I'll start screen sharing the time, the countdown, and I'll let Christy in the Zoom.
We turn our cameras on.
No, because I'm going to be screen sharing the countdown. And if we turn on our cameras, then.
Okay, sounds good. So we turn on our camera when it's like opening.
Like
ceremony.
when you're talking, yeah.
Wait,
And
Christy's
Christy
not supposed to be here at this opening ceremony. Actually, yeah, she can be here. And
she left the waiting. Wait, I need to screen share.
Okay.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Yep, go ahead.
So I think it said in the email that it would be Richard, Michelle, and then me. So are we going to read in that order? Because I was looking at the script and it said otherwise.
For which session?
The keynote.
Richard or someone who's speaking at the keynote, could you answer that question?
Wait, repeat that.
The email that I received, it said, please read in the order of Richard, Michelle, and then Esther, but the script says otherwise. It says Richard, Esther, and then Michelle, I believe. So are we going to follow the script? Or are we going to follow what Christy wants?
Just follow what Christy wants.
Okay, everyone. And I think from now on, if you have a question or something to say, send it in the chat, because soon, like, we're already live on YouTube, and soon I think Q1 will be sending out the email. So more people will be listening.
Welcome everyone to our very first Standby AAPI conference hosted by D-Tester Magazine, Asian Activists, and Gen Z We Are the Future to celebrate and mobilize AAPI community and allies with a keynote speaker from Stop AAPI Hate, a series of panelists, interactive activities, and more engaging events. We are very excited to have you here today, and we hope you enjoy this conference. My name is Richard, and I am the co-founder of Asian Activists, an organization focused on promoting Asian awareness and empowering the Asian youth around the world.
My name is Yuan. I'm the founder and executive director at the Tester Magazine, an international youth platform committed to uplifting voices of youth of color and intersectional advocacy.
And my name is Claire, and I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Gen Z We Are the Future, a global youth-led nonprofit organization with a mission of inspiring and educating Gen Zers to work towards a more united future. If you can see on your screens, the conference will be split up into 3 separate blocks. So each block will feature a panel session, a short block, an interactive section, and a take action section. For more specific rundown of the schedule, please visit standbyaapi.card.co. I think the link is also in the YouTube live chat.
There will also be 5 giveaways for 5 lucky conference attendees to win during our Standby AAPI conference of the books Heart of Fire, An Immigrant's Daughter Story, written by Maisie K. Perino, and Facing the Mountain, written by Daniel James Brown. So be on the lookout. We will also put in a check-in form in the YouTube live chat at the end of each session, and you will receive 1 entry by filling out the form. You can attend as many sessions as you'd like, attend more sessions for a chance to win our giveaways.
Yeah, we also have launched a merch collection in celebration of this conference and AAPI Heritage Month, and you can support us by purchasing our merch available in different colors, sizes, and designs, and 100% of the proceeds will go towards an Asian nonprofit organization, and you can visit the link later will be put in the YouTube chat to check out our merch.
Again, we are delighted to be hosting this conference and uniting, celebrating, and mobilizing the AAPI community and allies. Now, without further ado, we will transition to the opening keynote speaker session.
So
Screen okay? All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, all of you, for inviting me here to speak with you all today. My name is Christy Shen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the, oh, you're seeing my other screen too. Let me reshare. That's awkward. There is a lag. Are you still seeing my presenter view? Great. Okay, I am going to start over and pretend like that did not happen. Okay, so hello everyone. Again, thank you for inviting me here today to speak with you all. My name is Christy Shen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the intern coordinator for the Stop AAPI Hate Youth campaign. Today, I am going to be talking to you all about student activism and how to stop AAPI hate as youth leaders. Before I start my presentation, I would like to make a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a way to pay respects, excuse me, to the indigenous peoples of the land we reside on. So the following statement was drafted by our Stop AAPI Hate Youth campaign interns, and I invite you all to honor the indigenous peoples of the land that we are on. The Stop AAPI Hate Youth campaign recognizes that we reside on stolen land. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the indigenous nations of the land that we occupy. We acknowledge and honor the land itself and the elders, past and present, and the people in the making that are connected to this land on which we gather. So I also want to add that we recognize that this acknowledgement is not enough, and it does not undo the harm that has been done and continues to be done to indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge that indigenous people are still here and they will not be erased. I personally reside on Ohlone land right here, which encompasses a lot of the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And I encourage everyone to visit nativeland.ca to find out more about the land that you are residing on. All right, so anti-Asian hate during COVID-19 pandemic. So I am sure you all are aware of the uptick in anti-Asian hate during this pandemic, and Stop AAPI Hate is a coalition created in response to the alarming escalation and bigotry and xenophobia resulting from this pandemic. It started as a reporting center launched on March 19th, 2020 by the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council, so APCON, Chinese for Affirmative Action, CAA, and the Asian American Studies Department of San Francisco State University, which is where I am getting my master's in. So the center tracks and responds to incidents of hate, violence, harassment, discrimination, shunning, and bullying against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. So here I want to emphasize that I will be using the term hate incidents instead of hate crimes, because crimes have this connotation that it is something punishable by law, and that does not encapsulate all of the incidents that our communities have faced these past few months. So we at Stop AAPI Hate frequently publish reports on the data that we've gathered on what people report to us. And so here are some of the main trends in our most recent incidents report published on May 6th. So in total, there were 6,603 reported incidents. And while 6,603 is high, we actually suspect that there is a large percentage of unreported incidents. So these numbers are probably only a fraction of what our community has experienced. So as you can see in this table, the vast majority of incidents reported were cases of verbal harassment. And some examples of verbal harassment or like name calling is statements like "go back to China" or "stop eating bats," "stay away," or "I don't want to get COVID from you," or "effing Chinese." The next largest category were incidents of avoidance and shunning, and that is 18.1%. So examples of this is prolonged glares when you're outside, or when people immediately cover their mouth when they're around you, or just deliberately moving away from you in this like very exaggerated manner. And then I guess the saddest part, or the next largest, is physical assaults, which is 12.6%. And this ranges from people getting shoved or to being beaten and physically assaulted. Anything with a physical contact we consider as a physical assault. In 2021, physical assaults increased by 6%. Something else we noticed in our data is that women experience 2 times more discrimination compared to men. And so this section of intersectionality between being an Asian and a woman cannot be neglected for our incidents. There has also been an increase in seniors experiencing hate incidents more this year as well. Related to sites of discrimination, businesses ranked the highest, followed by public streets and sidewalks. And this graph actually shows that a lot of incidents are in public locations, like streets and sidewalk, public transit, public parks. And so another thing to note, is that online incidents has increased 2 times this year compared to 2020. And when filling out the form, there is a section we ask about the suspected reason for discrimination. And most people choose gender, language, and religion as the primary reason. And our data also shows that Chinese are the largest ethnic group targeted, followed by Koreans, and then Filipinx, and then Vietnamese people. And so you might wonder, why isn't race or ethnicity on this list of suspected reasons for discrimination? And that's because it's all about race. We suspect that all these incidents are racially motivated, and people are singling out and targeting Asians during this pandemic. Here I have 2 examples to highlight how we cannot dissociate race from these hate incidents. And as we read these incidents out loud, please share your emotions and your feelings in the chat so we can build this community of empathy. So I'm going to invite the student organizers, Michelle, Richard, and Esther, out to read these incidents.
So I'm going to read the first incident. I'm Chinese American. During this pandemic at the mall, I was asked by a person to take the next following elevator because I was making her mother uncomfortable just by my presence. Yet they allowed another Caucasian man into the elevator. Maximum capacity of the elevator was 4 people, yet I was excluded because of their fear of my race.
So for the second incident, someone from Gilbert, Arizona said, while shopping at a local grocery, I walked past a gentleman who said, Chinese mother. I continued shopping, then ran into him again in another aisle when he said the same slur. I told him I'm not from there and never been to China. And he said, doesn't matter. You're all the same. You're all a virus.
Thank you for reading that for me. Yes, there's a lag in the live comments, so I'm sure you all are putting in your feelings, but I just can't read them right now. And I will continue to share some incidents, and so please continue to type in the chat how you're feeling or what you're thinking about these incidents. All right. So because you all are probably students, I want to take some time to share the youth data that we've gathered. So we at Stop AAPI Hate define youth as individuals under 20, and this is the age range of you and your peers probably. So in terms of sites of discrimination, we see that youth experience verbal harassment and name calling over 10% more than non-youth. This report actually also shows that youth experience more shunning compared to non-youth. And over half of the youth incidents included anti-Asian or anti-Chinese hate speech. And our data also shows that female youth are 2 times more likely to be targets of hate incidents, which is in line with the overall data. Here are some incidents of verbal harassment or shunning that youth reported to Stop AAPI Hate. Again, please share how these incidents make you feel. And I am inviting our student leaders again to read these incidents out loud for me.
A woman sitting at a bus stop was screaming at myself and other Asians that she saw walking. She said that we were dirty Chinese, that we were trying to take over the US, and that we should go back to our fucking country, among other things.
An 18-year-old male from Boston said, I was on a scooter going down the street to get to an appointment with a staff member at my school. As I was going by, a man yelled, fucking coronavirus, and started coughing violently.
For the next incident, someone from Dickinson, Texas said, I was calling my mother in Target to see what groceries I would need to buy, and a lady screamed at me to go back to China as I was talking to my mother in Japanese. No one was really there because it was after school.
I was walking with my family and someone stared at me and mumbled that we had corona. I didn't cause a scene, but I did feel hurt by it.
Thank you for reading. And I'm starting to see some of your comments in the chat, a lot of heartbreaking and messages that this is hurting us as well. For sites of discrimination, we see that businesses and public places are the most common, which is in line with the overall data. But I want to shift our attention to 2 sites of discrimination in particular that affect youth, and those are schools and online. So unsurprisingly, youth experience significantly higher rates of discrimination at schools than non-youth because you all are in school and I am not in like elementary or middle high school. And our data also shows that youth experience online hate incidents 6.6% more than non-youth. And with most students remote learning and spending more time online, we think that this number is actually an underrepresentation of how many AAPI youth are experiencing hate incidents online. Here, I want to highlight that 48% of incidents had bystanders, which is an adult or someone who can clearly intervene or interject the situation. So there was a bystander present 48% of the time, yet only in 10% of the incidents did a bystander actually intervene. So here I include 2 examples of incidents that occurred at schools or around schools, and then 2 that occurred online. And I'm inviting you all to speak again or read.
An 18-year-old female said, I was in the school bathroom and 3 white girls entered. They immediately covered their face with their shirts, even though they were with each other before. When I confronted them about it, they said they didn't want to get the coronavirus.
An 18-year-old female from Honolulu, Hawaii said, a middle-aged white man was in his car driving out of the parking lot at Wesleyan College. He yelled, "Stay in your fucking house if you're sick," because I am an Asian and I was one of the only people wearing a mask on campus.
A 17-year-old male in Union City said, I was playing a video game where I was on public voice chat where people were attacking me for supposedly having coronavirus because I'm Asian.
A 14-year-old female from Cerritos, California said, I was on Omegle, a video chat site, and a teenage boy said to me jokingly, how was the bat? He proceeded to laugh and I couldn't help but feel embarrassed and infuriated that this was the type of comment I received because I look and am Chinese.
Thank you for helping me and sharing space with me by reading this. And thank you everyone who is attending the conference for sharing your feelings and your reactions to these reported incidents in this space with me. So why is this happening now? And what is so different about this pandemic that caused so many people to turn on Asians? Well, I want to tell you that it's not different. And actually, this response was quite predictable and aligned with American history. So in order to address and understand the current rise in anti-Asian hate, it is important to consider the racialization or stereotyping of Asian Americans. There are 2 common representations of Asian Americans as either this model minority or a perpetual foreigner. And both model minority the model minority myth and the perpetual foreigner stereotype work together to uphold white supremacy, which is a system created to exploit people of color. So prior to COVID, the model minority myth was actually the most salient, and this gave an insider status that highlighted the success of Asians and suggested that Asian Americans are not really people of color and we do not experience racism. We are immune to racism. And so when we actually do speak up about racism, our experiences are oftentimes dismissed because we don't experience racism. And so the current racialization at play is this perpetual foreigner stereotype that Asian Americans are outsiders and we will never be truly American. And this makes it easier for people, AAPI community, people in the AAPI community like me to be seen as reasonable targets, and for people to direct their anger, their frustration, their fear, their aggression towards me and us, as we have seen during this pandemic and actually throughout history. So anti-Asian hate is a historical phenomenon often rising in times of crisis when America searches for a scapegoat or someone to blame. And Stop AAPI Hate has found 3 major trends in historical cases of anti-Asian discrimination. First is political tensions that cause a spike in seeing Asians as outsiders. Second is this belief that Asian bodies are carriers of diseases and that we are dirty and unsanitary. And then third is during economic downturn, it causes the need to divert away from domestic leadership and scapegoat perceived others in foreign countries. So these all work to reinforce the idea that Asians are yellow perils, or the idea that Asians are a threat to Western society. So I am going to be doing an activity with you all where I'll share some notable incidents of anti-Asian hate in the United States, and you'll categorize whether you think this is an example of political rhetoric, a health threat, or economic hardship? And there is a lag, so I'm going to pretend that you all are doing this maybe like 30 seconds in advance. Okay, so first we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, and during the mid-1800s, many Chinese immigrants came to the US because of job and food security in China following the Opium Wars. And a lot of Chinese immigrants were hired as railroad workers and other low-paying jobs. White workers were afraid that Chinese workers would be stealing their jobs and employed slogans like "the Chinese must go." And then in 1882, the Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act to forbid Chinese people from immigrating to the United States. This act was actually the first legislation that prevented a particular ethnic group from entering the country. So, do you all think this is an example of like political rhetoric, a health threat, economic hardship? Organizers, feel free to participate so I don't feel alone. All right. So second is this bubonic plague in Chinatowns. So in the early 1900s, there was a suspected case of the bubonic plague outbreak in San Francisco Chinatown. And overnight, health officials actually came into quarantine and placed Chinatown on a lockdown. But before they put Chinatown in a complete lockdown, they ensured to evacuate all white Americans in the area before. So only the Chinese residents in Chinatown were prohibited from leaving Chinatown, but the white residents in Chinatown were allowed to leave before public health officials closed down the entire neighborhood. So again, what do you all think this is an example of? A political rhetoric, health threat, economic hardship? I'm gonna give some time for you all to think about it. All right. Okay, third, I want to talk about Japanese American incarceration during World War II. So Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes under Executive Order 9066 during World War II after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And the American government was actually extremely wary of Japanese Americans during this time because they thought Japanese Americans were spies for Japan and thought it was best to incarcerate them. So about 2/3 of incarcerated Japanese Americans were actually American born and had no connections to Japan, meaning like they had never been to Japan. So they were being unfairly blamed and taken away. And also, like, there were a subset of Japanese American men who were taken away from their families because they were seen as alien enemies, and also that they were a higher threat to the American government. Again, there is this political rhetoric, health threat, or an economic hardship. All right. You all are getting this real, yeah, okay. I'm gonna move on to the last incident that I will be talking about today. And this is only a subset of incidents, and this does not encapsulate all of Asian American and Pacific Islander history, as a disclaimer. Okay, so aftermath of 9/11. So after the September 11, 2001 attacks from the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, South Asians were targeted and blamed for being terrorists. And in the days following after 9/11, a number of hate incidents and crimes were reported targeting Muslims, Sikhs, and people of the South Asian community. Mosques and other religious buildings were also attacked, and people associated South Asians with labels like terrorists and outsiders, and they violently responded to South Asians. What do you all think this is? I'm looking at some of your comments. All right, yeah. So actually, a lot of you noted several of these categories. And actually, like, you're right, because this all is encapsulated by yellow peril, and you can't separate one from the other. And many of the historical causes for anti-Asian hate are present today. And the US is like health threat. US is going through a pandemic. That's public health. And then unemployment in the United States reached a new high, which is economics. And then the US-China relations aren't doing very well because of like the trade wars before, and then the former president's anti-China rhetoric. So that's the political relations. So all of those historical examples help to explain the current rise in anti-Asian hate. And so actually when COVID-19 first began spreading in the United States during early March, late February, there was a huge surge of anti-Asian hate incidents, as seen in like the various news articles posted here. And during the first week of Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center's launching, we received over 700 reports of anti-Asian discrimination and hate incidents. And in this past year, as I just mentioned, Stop AAPI Hate received over 6,000 incidents of anti-Asian discrimination. And so this history of AAPI oppression is not new, and it continues to repeat itself in times of crisis. But you know what also continues to repeat itself is this history of Asian American community resistance. And we also have a history of fighting back against the system, and we will continue to fight back. So in the 1800s, we had Chinese railroad workers staging one of the largest labor strikes at the time for higher wages and better working conditions. Japanese Americans during World War II incarceration also protested. And there's this history of no-no boys who disagreed with American politics. And then the South Asian community, and actually a lot of allies organized against the hate crimes and discrimination following the events of 9/11. And currently, our communities are coming together to protest against Asian hate, and we have organizations like ours holding campaigns for Stop AAPI Hate. And we have youth like you who are organizing on social media, attending these conferences, sharing stories, having these hashtags like Stop Asian Hate, Stop AAPI Hate, Amplify API. And so our voices are so powerful, and we are making history with our activism. And I'm a little short on time, but I still want to spotlight the work of Stop AAPI Hate Youth Campaign. So the youth campaign is comprised of high school interns, and they have been working on formulating and advocating for policy changes in schools and school districts to create a more welcoming and safer environment for everyone. These are some of the youth campaign's accomplishments from this semester. They helped draft a resolution titled Combating Hate Against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for the Los Angeles County Office of Education. They also wrote a statement for the press release in support of New York Representative Grace Meng's legislation, Teaching Asian Pacific American Histories Act. More recently, interns attended a virtual roundtable discussion with Superintendent Tony Thurmond and Assembly Member David Chu, highlighting the 5 key recommendations that they have been advocating for all semester long to prevent racism and hate. And so the following slides, I will be discussing these 5 recommendations that the youth campaign interns have been advocating for this past year. And they are 1, ethnic studies, 2, restorative justice, 3, anti-racism training, 4, affinity spaces and student activism, and then finally, culturally responsive wellness. And these slides were actually created by our youth interns to amplify their suggestions. And so you all can take these suggestions back to your school districts. So one of the biggest recommendations that we continue to advocate for is ethnic studies and implementation of ethnic studies. So racist bullying occurs because of one's like physical appearance, ethnic background, cultural practices, or the way one talks or dresses. And along with the lack of media representation, AAPI history is often omitted from schools and curricula, along with narratives of other communities of color. So to define ethnic studies, it is an interdisciplinary study of race, ethnicity, and culture with the purpose of providing youth with a full spectrum of knowledge and history to help youth develop fundamental skills of critical thinking, global thinking, intersectional thinking, and all these other critical thinking skills. Ethnic studies helps our understanding of race, class, gender, and sexuality, and helps us put it in perspective with social groups and systems. And it helps youth learn about the histories of different US communities, the roots and impacts of racism, and movements that have sought racial justice. In addition, by adding more programs and materials to touch on BIPOC communities and experiences, ethnic studies give students of color a chance to learn more about our identities and give students an opportunity to better understand ourselves, to feel represented, and heard, and most importantly, to feel like we have a place in society. And so all of this will ultimately shape the way students view racism and injustice and enable us all to advocate for rights and justice of our communities. The next recommendation we have is restorative justice. So restorative justice is an approach to justice in which one of the responses to a crime or an offense or an incident is to organize a meeting between the victim and the offender. And sometimes also like people of the wider community. So like maybe staff members or other folks that are involved. And restorative justice is not only used in criminal justice systems, but it's also been implemented in a lot of school systems recently. So it can empower students and resolve conflicts in a better and more intimate way. The Center for Promise conducted a study in 2018 that has found that suspending and expelling students, which is kind of like a zero tolerance approach, does not work and does not improve student behavior or address the underlying cause of the behavior, or nor does it make schools a safer space. But instead it comes with a lot of negative outcomes. And we see that these punishments, these zero tolerance punishments, are actually disproportionately affecting students of color and students with disabilities. And so to replace these zero tolerance approaches, restorative justice practices and socio-emotional learning practices and positive behavior intervention practices have become more popular to create these like peer mediated space where people can talk through and learn what they have done wrong or how to grow from it. And so successful restorative justice practices addresses ideas like institutional racism, biases, and it'll encompass not only to help student behaviors, but also behaviors of the staff, the community, and also like talk about addressing policies and making curricula that focuses more on students and of healing. Okay, I'm gonna try to speed through these next three. Okay, another critical measure is this like idea of anti-racism training. So anti-racism training, I think you all are aware, is this idea to target the root cause of the issue. So specifically with our AAPI community, we have seen a huge uptick in anti-Asian hate incidents and discrimination against Asian Americans. And the suggestion was actually one of the intern suggestions that we should have more small group workshop spaces to go about anti-racism training, because they found that large school assemblies actually don't really work and does not address a lot of the underlying causes and issues. So in these small group environments, it actually allows for more productive conversations where both like victims or offenders can feel safe to hear what they have done and what they can do next or to improve their situations. It also provides an active and preventative learning environment that emphasizes on moving forward as a community and building community and learning from these past mistakes to avoid future situations of bullying or any forms of hate. And so through anti-racism small group workshops, we can reduce the amount of hate and foster a safe and inclusive environment that is best for everyone instead of just like one group. And the next recommendation is affinity spaces. And affinity spaces are vital because they create a safe space for members of a specific community, often a marginalized community actually, to come together and speak without the pressure of needing to pander to a majority. And An affinity group really usually consists of people that share one or more common factors of their identity, such as like race, gender, their sexuality, religion. And we see affinity groups like a student of color group, or a BSU, Black Student Union, or an Asian American Pacific Islander group. And during these meetings, they talk about important topics related to race and status and how we are being treated in society without needing to fit in any other mold from the majority. Some statistics show that students without affinity groups actually have a lower self-esteem and self-depiction of themselves in comparison to students who do have affinity spaces and access to affinity spaces. And those who do have access to affinity spaces actually are able to find pride within their racial or cultural upbringing and to develop the courage, and they're actually more likely to become activists and leaders for their communities because they have these safe spaces that they're being grown up in and fostered in. And so affinity spaces will raise the mental health of students of color, and more importantly, give students of color a space to unapologetically be themselves and express their pride, their courage, and all of your activism. And finally, I know it's long. I want to say this importance of implementing culturally responsive wellness, which promotes this idea of a physical and mental well-being in a manner that is respectful for an individual's, everyone's identity. And in the AAPI community, there is a lot of stigma attached to mental health. And with this current rise in hate crimes, I think a lot of AAPI students are finding themselves concealing their mental and emotional well-being. And a lot of psychological and health is actually very white-centered. So we see that students of color are actually making up almost half of the student body in a lot of schools across the nation, but there is a lack of diversity or training or cultural responsiveness for schools and counselors, and the way bullying or any of these incidents are handled. And this lack of representation in the staff leads to BIPOC students feeling isolated and feeling like they can't reach out for mental health because they don't have a support system that will understand them or knows how to affect them. And so we need programs to train wellness staff on how to best serve BIPOC students and serve students of different cultural backgrounds. We also need culturally responsive wellness to help students who are struggling with trauma and poor mental health so they can have the support system. And ultimately, this suggestion is for BIPOC students to feel safe to discuss their identity, their emotions, and to find stability within this like harsh environment that we are all part of. And also this ultimately will lead us all to be more comfortable with ourselves, our identity, and our environments. All right, I know that was a lot, and that wraps up the 5 recommendations: ethnic studies, restorative justice, anti-racism training, affinity spaces, and culturally responsive wellness. Our interns are actually continuing to develop policies and suggestions that helps everyone. And we'll actually be working specifically for mental health related policies this summer. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the Stop AAPI Hate Youth campaign advocates for recommendations that will not only improve the well-being of AAPI students, but they will also improve the school environment and experience for students of all backgrounds. So these recommendations are very strategically crafted to help all students. And so I want to conclude my presentation today with this idea about reimagining our communities. So I don't want to belong in a society that does not appreciate me and that isolates me and wants to scapegoat me. And instead, I want to organize for and rebuild a society that can respect all people, you know, a society where I feel like I can truly belong. And so let's all work to reimagine and reshape our communities together. So thank you again for joining me and sharing space with me today in this presentation. And I am looking forward to how we can continue to learn and unlearn throughout the rest of today's conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So right now the chat mods are going to be looking through the chat and seeing if there's any questions for Christy. And if you have any questions, feel free to just drop it in the YouTube live chat. So our first question is, will they get access to the slides?
I can make access to the slide. Actually, there's a resource slide that I can share. So we have a toolkit folder where actually a lot of our slides are in there and a lot of our reports. So there's this back to school report that is like not officially published because we finished it towards the end of the school year. So it didn't really make sense to officially publish it. And it has all of the 5 recommendations that I went over today. And I can make these slides available to send to everyone after.
So our next question is, how do you practice self-care when so much of your work focuses on things like anti-Asian hate?
Yeah, that is a great question because a lot of the times I am very guilty of turning things off and not reading a lot of things because it's just so disheartening. And I also I personally have a therapist, and if you have the means and if you're able to, you should seek out professional help. And I, for myself specifically, look for someone who reflects me and reflects my identity. So I have an Asian American woman as a therapist because I find that that is just someone who I feel most comfortable with. So, take self-care by maybe just logging off and not being the most updated to everything, because that's totally okay. And also getting professional help if you want to feel better, and it's just very helpful. I mean, therapy is great not only to learn about yourself, but to also have the tools to dissect and discuss your own personal thoughts and revelations.
So another person asked, how did you start getting involved in Stop AAPI Hate organization?
This is funny. I am actually one of the co-founders. Dr. Russell Jung is a professor in the Asian American Studies department at San Francisco State University, which is exactly where I am getting my master's degree. And so he just kind of pulled us all in way in the beginning because he needed more people to help analyze and look through the incident. So that is how I got involved, and I just never left because this is such important work.
So the next question is, did you always want to be involved in activism?
I actually didn't notice that. So I grew up in the Bay Area, which is a very Asian space. And I didn't realize that I was an ethnic minority in the United States until I went to college. And I went to college in a very predominantly white state, in a predominantly white institution. And that's where I realized that my voice needed to be heard and my experiences needed to come through. And so that was the reason why my activism started. And that was honestly one of the main reasons why I am so for ethnic studies and why I am so for Asian American studies. And getting this Asian American studies degree is part of this cultural realization that I kind of call it. And so, I wasn't always an activist, but once I had the mentality, and once I started learning, I just never go back. I don't think you ever go back from wanting social change and social justice.
Okay, so for the next question is, what were your inspirations to start engaging in anti-Asian hate activism?
I think I don't want to say inspirations. It's kind of like I can't not be a part of this community. I am very clear. I am a Chinese American woman, immigrant family. This is my story. This is my family. And so whatever is happening now, it's kind of like a historical trend, as I mentioned before, but also there's no way that I cannot be involved because this is my identity. This is who I am. And this is, everything that is part of me. So there is, inspiration. I guess like I can talk about the leaders, but I think you all know about all the Asian American activists like Helen Zia and everyone else. So, this is part of our experience and our story, and that's why we should all be involved.
That will be the last question that Christy will have time to answer. We hope that her presentation helped you further your knowledge in surrounding the AAPI community. Thank you so much once again for attending our keynote speech, and thank you so much, Christy, for her presentation. So our next section will begin in 5 minutes. There will be a speech dedicated to empowering Pacific Islander community. So remember to stay until the end of session 1, which ends at 12:20 Pacific time, for a chance to be entered into a giveaway for a book written by New York Times bestselling AAPI author.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at our Empowering the Pacific Islander Community panel. So my name is Claire Yang, and I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Gen Z We Are the Future.
And my name is Michelle Negroho, and I am the scriptwriter on the podcast team of Gen Z We Are the Future. And we will be the moderators for this section.
So today we have the pleasure of welcoming Robin and Sina, who will be answering questions about the Pacific Islander community and how we can become better allies.
Before we begin our panel, we ask that you put all of your questions, which you have for our panelists, into the chat. At the end of the panel, we will go over a few of them. To begin this panel, let's have each of our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I guess I'll kick things off. My name is Robin Watha, and I am the editor-in-chief of Pacificus Magazine. It's a publication that highlights Pacifica creatives around the world, and I'm just thankful for the opportunity that we have to represent our Pacific Islander community on this conference today. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Sina Weepy. I am the Policy Associate for Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, also known as EPIC. We're a national organization based in Los Angeles, and we focus on leadership development, research, and advocacy. And I am zooming to you from Tongvaland in Los Angeles.
Hi guys, my name is Athena. I'm with Angry Asian Americans. We're a local activism group and we run an Instagram account. Yeah.
Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Let's get started on our panel questions.
So our first question is a pretty general question for our attendees to get a little bit of context on the Pacific Islander community. So who is included in the Pacific Islander community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that. The Pacific Islander community encompasses 3 different regions, and that would be made up by Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. All of these regions have a variety of different islands with different cultures and different languages. And so that is a lot of culture that encompasses one term. For example, I am Tongan American, so both of my parents are born and raised in Tonga, but that is part of Polynesia. I think a lot of people are mostly familiar with Polynesia because it includes Hawaii and like Samoa and Tonga and different things like that, but there's so much more out there in Oceania and what we have to offer. So that is what a Pacific Islander is. Anybody who is of Pacific Islander descent comes from Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia.
Yes, thank you. So our next question is, how was your cultural background influenced your experience?
I can answer that. I think, in this work, in this position particularly, it's the first time where I've really felt empowered and confident to utilize my cultural values and being very comfortable doing that, especially in a policy space that is where that's not really normal. But they have never steered me wrong, my cultural values, and I've always tried to use it, in any space that I'm in. So in particular, in addition to Robin, I am also Tongan as well. So one of the pillars in Tongan culture is to maintain good relations, also known as tauhiva. And that is such a key pillar that I really try to practice daily in this work.
Yeah, and I can definitely offer some insight on that as well. Like Sina, I definitely try to find things that I can pull from within my culture into my everyday life. There are just certain aspects of my culture that have been so sacred for me, and different things that kind of come to mind is just the importance of family within our culture. It's really important for us to have those good relations and really honor our ancestors in different ways, in a variety of ways, whether it be naming our kids after them or in Tongan culture, we have something called the fahu system, which is kind of the matriarchy. And it's a really cool thing that we do to honor the women within our families. And it's definitely shaped my perspective on how I would love to raise my own family. And now that I have a daughter of my own, it's just important for me to implement those values so that she understands her role within the family and how she is going to be leading our family towards the future. And so growing up in America, I'm a first generation, born and raised here in the US. And so it's been a little complicated trying to figure out how to implement my culture and how to really find my identity as a Tongan American, because even though I'm Tongan, I think it's like I don't live up to all the Tongan traditions because they have changed and they have kind of evolved over time, especially being raised here in America. Something you guys need to know about Pacific Islanders is that we are in a diaspora at this time, and a lot of us are not born and raised in our ancestral lands anymore. So we have a lot of us who are born in the US or Australia or New Zealand. And because of that little disconnect, it's a little bit harder for us to all stay on the same page of where our culture is going to be tomorrow or a year from now. But it's a little interesting to have those conversations with our family members and even with my cousins abroad, and seeing what is different and seeing what we've kept the same. But I think culture is always changing, culture is always evolving, and that's something that we have to navigate and still learn how to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. So our next question is about AAPI Heritage Month. So what do you think AAPI Heritage Month means to you and your community?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I've been asked this question a few times, in particular this month. It's a question that I never really know how to answer because Pacific Islanders, at least in my experience, with a lot of partners that we work with, and just trying to, stay in touch with the community and stay in tune with them about Heritage Month, is that I think before we even talk about Heritage Month, I think just the label AAPI is usually like a term that most Pacific Islanders don't really identify with. And so when it's AAPI Heritage Month, there's still a disconnect. I was on a call a few weeks ago, and someone who is Native Hawaiian was talking about Heritage Month, and to them they don't feel anything particular about this month or towards this month. And something that they said really blew my mind. And they said, I don't really care for Heritage Month. I want my land back. So that kind of just struck a chord in me and just made me feel like, what am I doing um, to kind of like align myself with people from Hawaii, who, especially Native Hawaiians, who've experienced so much so much pain and trauma because of US colonization. Yeah, so I mean, it's also a month where, I do recognize there's been many leaders and advocates in the past who really fought to even have a term called the AAPI. So I want to acknowledge and recognize those leaders. But I think, we're at a time now where I think it's okay for Pacific Islanders to speak up and really express how they feel, especially about just this month in particular. Because to me, every month is Heritage Month, as a Pacific Islander. And I think there could be a lot that's misunderstood and miscommunicated, and very invisible in just the broader AAPI space, particularly with Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Sina was sharing, I think within our community, it's kind of like a touchy subject for a lot of people when it comes to AAPI month, because we often feel that the PI is silent. And when we say that, it's like, it's so cool to see all the representation and like what different social media platforms and networks have been doing to celebrate AAPI month. But at the same time, when I look at their incentives of what they're doing to teach about culture and to teach about different people, I don't really see us part of the conversation. And if it is, it's very minimal, whether it be like the Disney movie Moana or whatever it is, you know? And so that's the thing. It's like, that's something that we have to work on within our own community, is trying to get more representation out there. I want to see more of us within film and within literature, and really enter those spaces. And something that's like been really cool to see over the most recent years is like Taika Waititi, who like is the director of like Thor Ragnarok. Like seeing that he was able to win an Oscar for even his screenplay for Jojo Rabbit, that was a big moment for our community. And I felt like only our community recognized that. And that's where I get a little bit kind of like flustered, because I know that we're part of this community, but it's so hard to stay within this proximity with Asian Americans when our people and our cultures are like they're polar opposite. And what I mean by that is like how our upbringing and like our challenges and what we face on a daily basis are different than our Asian brothers and sisters here in the US. And so I think that's where a lot of the confusion kind of comes into play, because we do support our Asian American community, but at the same time, it's like a lot of us don't feel like that's reciprocated throughout all platforms. But that's kind of like, I don't know if that's just me and Sina's opinions, but that's definitely from what I've kind of experienced within my own family and within my own friends within my community. And so, yeah, it's interesting because we want to honor this month. We want to honor what Asian American Pacific Islander Month is all about. And in order for us to do that, we have to step up our game as well. So it's not anything shady to say about like the US in general, but I think that my community can be doing more to make sure that we're part of the conversation.
Yes, that's wonderful to know. So, given the lack of Pacific Islander representation in many of our history curriculum, how can we educate ourselves on Pacific Islander history, undertold stories, and celebrate the contributions of Pacific Islanders?
Yeah, I heard, I think in the last presentation, they shared, the new bill that I believe Representative Grace Meng had just introduced this year, which was the Asian Pacific American History Act, I believe. We actually, EPIC had a role in making sure that there were Pacific Islander history points in that legislation. It was actually only supposed to be, I think, Asian American history, but our Asian allies had advocated to make sure Pacific Islanders were included in that bill. There's such a wealth of knowledge in Pacific Island studies, and we have so many scholars in academia, across the country, right? And even especially in the Pacific, who are being very intentional about teaching, Pacific Islander history, in at the university level. So I think that is definitely, a space where folks can learn more from. And, I really think it's part of just doing the work, right? Like we get asked, these questions a lot, and that's just one. It's one thing to ask about it, but to like actually do the work and like do the research, look for the PI scholars in academia, read books that are authored by Pacific Islander writers and authors. That's putting in the work as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that when it comes to literature studies and different things like that, my people definitely have to step up our game when it comes to educating people who have questions about our community. Like Sina said, it really is about doing the work. If people are genuinely interested in learning about Pacifica culture and our communities, they should be able to find that information. And like I think another tricky part of it is that our ancestry is like all of our history is told through oral like storytelling. And so that's kind of been like a little bit tricky, like a tricky thing for our community to kind of navigate, is going from oral storytelling to actually documenting what is happening within our culture. And that's actually like a big reason why I created a magazine called Pacificist, because I just felt like there was a lack of literature that was out there to highlight my community. And for me specifically, I created Pacificist to highlight Pacific Islander creatives around the world. And that was just something that wasn't talked about. It was nothing, there was nowhere for us to read about individuals who are making waves throughout the art industry or within fashion or within music. And that's really what prompted me to even start this publication in the first place, is because we wanted to offer that resource for those who were curious and wanted to learn more about what was happening within the PI community today so that we can impact tomorrow.
Yeah, so as a follow-up to the previous question, what do you think that we can do to increase the representation of Pacific Islanders and uplift their voices in mainstream media?
I think there's actually been quite a few films, developed by Pacific Islanders, like especially abroad in like New Zealand and Australia and even in the islands, who I know have, made the effort to bring their work and bring their art to the US to really showcase the not only the diversity in our community, but the stories that exist that often get very overlooked. So I think that would be definitely one way, is to seek out Pacific Islander filmmakers, like, and a lot of them aren't necessarily in the US. I'm hopeful that, in the future there will be, but yeah, I think just kind of seeing the films that already exist. I actually got to watch one of them that was hosted by this, believe the Miss one of the Smithsonians in DC, and they were showcasing, I think, a Pacific film called Vi, which means water. And it really told the story of, a different Pacific Islander women from different cultures and backgrounds, and just what that, it really, I feel like watching that, I felt, that I could relate to a lot of the experiences that all these women were showcasing about, what it means to be, like a Pacific woman, in school, but still has to take care of her family. Like, that's a very real thing. My cousin just graduated from Cal State Long Beach, and her mom is not here with us, and she's lives in New Zealand, but she's had to take care of my uncle and her brothers, like, for years now, and she's only 23, right? So those stories are very much real, and I think definitely, it's especially during Heritage Month, I think there needs to be more work that's done to kind of make sure that we showcase these films too on like certain streaming services like Netflix or HBO or whatever it is, because the most of the ones that we have seen so far are particularly more Asian American films. And so if we are going to be included in, the stories that are told, especially during Heritage Month, then there needs to be a lot more work and intention done to make sure that Pacific Islanders are included.
Yeah, I think for like some resources that I can think of is just like trying to get in touch with different filmmakers and stuff throughout like Australia and the US. We do have like what's called the Pacifica Film Festival. And that's been actually really helpful. That's connected me to a lot of filmmakers and learning more about my history. There was a film that I watched like not too long ago, a couple of years ago, called Blackbird. And many people probably aren't aware of this term, but blackbirding was a term that was used for slave trade throughout the Pacific Islands and South America. And there were tons of islands, like villages, that were like either like kidnapped or like tricked into joining these boats and like just never coming back home. And so a lot of our history is kind of like spread out. But that was a film that was very like eye-opening for me because it even impacted my island of Tonga. And that was just something I never learned about. And so I feel like as a people, we're still learning, and anybody who's interested to learn more, there are resources out there, whether it be with EPIC through Sina's organization or Pacificus. I feel like our community is definitely putting in the work, like more work than I've seen in like the last like 20 years. Like I feel like within the past year, I've seen so many organizations and activist groups really step up to the plate so that we can be included in the conversations that need to be had about our community. And so it's just really been amazing to witness and see within my lifetime. And so I'm just excited to see what everything else is going to turn into in the future. But I think another thing is, if you guys really want to support our community, just the recognition goes a long way. You guys would probably actually be like really surprised about the Pacific Islanders that you see within film and within commercials. Like just recently, Veronica Pomete, she is a Tongan plus size model who's based out in New York, who was just recently on a huge Target campaign. And I felt like that was a huge win for my community to see something like that. Again, Taika Waititi, like being like winning an Oscar for like best original like screenplay for Jojo Rabbit. Another person that comes to mind, from if anybody's a fan of the show Riverdale, like KJ Apa is on that show and he plays Archie. And a lot of you guys may not even think that he was Pacific Islander, but he does have Samoan descent and his father is from there. And that's what I'm saying is like, it's so cool to kind of really dissect that and understand like what we are bringing to the table, because we feel like it doesn't always get recognized. But I feel like that is like a big thing that other people can do to really help our community out, is to shout us out when you guys see us out there and like look for those resources that are openly available. And like I said, within the past year, a lot of things have opened up and a lot of people have been starting new groups and organizations within the PI community so that we can educate and teach about our culture. And it's been a really cool thing to see.
Yes, so that is the last question for the reimagining the Pacific Islanders community. Thank you for your great suggestions. We hope that this panel helped you learn more about the Pacific Islander community, as well as how you can become a better ally.
Yeah, thank you so much once again for attending our Empowering the Pacific Islander Community panel, and a huge thank you to Robin and Sina. Our next panel will be the Reimagining Education about Asian History, AAPI History. So yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at our session 1 panel, Reimagining Education about Asian and Pacific Islander History. My name is Coco G, and I am a Discord moderator at Gen Z. We are the future, and I will be one of the moderators for this panel.
And my name is Vanna Perez, and I'm the research and executive marketing team at Gen Z. We are the future, and I'll be the other person moderating this panel. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming 3 members of the API community who will be answering questions about education in API history, self-education, as well as ways to resolve the anti-Asian hate feminist.
Please welcome our education panelists, Julia Kong, Nigan Lee, and Athena Shao. Before we begin our panel, we ask that you put all of your questions which you have for our panelists into the chat, and at the end of the panel, we will go over a few of them.
To begin this panel, let's have each of our panelists introduce themselves. Julia, would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Kong. I am a student. I'm an actress, model, and person on the internet. And I'd like to say I've created a solid community online where we can discuss everything from social justice to exploring identity within the boundaries of your culture, or just like the intersection between just art, beauty, self-expression, identity, and everything and anything. And I think that could put me in a nutshell. And my pronouns are she and her.
I'll go next. Hi, my name is Nan Le. I am the founder and executive director of Asian Youth Act. I am a student as well, but I'm also a vocalist and a researcher. And I think that is, in a nutshell, who I am and what I do. But I'm really glad to be here, and I love talking to people about their stories, their perspectives, and creating a community that also talks about these really important issues.
Hi guys, I'm Athena. I am a writer with Angry Asian Americans, and we run a website and an Instagram account. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about all these issues with you guys.
Great. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Let's get started on our panel questions.
The first topic we would like to cover is API history in the public education system and education curriculum.
The first question is to get a basic idea of your personal experiences with learning about API history. As a student, how is your experience with learning about API history in school? Anyone can go first.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. Basically, AAPI history. Well, I'm Burmese Chinese American, and I remember just all throughout public school, so K through 12, being so excited when I got a history book and flipping through the index to find any mention of the word Burma, and there would be one page, and it would just be about how the British colonized Burma, which is not good news and not good history, or it doesn't really enrich a young Burmese kid's life and help them learn about their culture or history at all. But I remember being so excited for just a tiny morsel of being mentioned somewhere that the rest of my class also had to study. But with that also came this shame that the only thing that Americans, or the only thing that my classmates are ever going to study about Myanmar is that we were colonized. They're not going to ever study anything beautiful about it or anything that actually reflects upon the culture. And I feel the same way now, where there's a military coup in Myanmar happening right now. And for the most part, people who ask me about it haven't really heard of Myanmar. And it's that same feeling that, oh my God, the only thing that people are ever going to know about my country and my history is that, like, just the ugly parts of it. And throughout middle school, high school, we did have other opportunities to learn about AAPI culture. Like, for example, I grew up in 626, and during the time of the Japanese internment camps, they actually repurposed the Santa Anita Mall that's in Arcadia as a Japanese internment camp. And in middle school, we used theater and a play to reenact that. And that type of learning about it, reenacting the fear and the harshness of that, was something that really deepened, I think, everyone's ability to grasp what happened and how bad it was, and that it was right here in our own hometown. So I think that was a great opportunity to learn. And I think the final thing that was really significant for me was not in high school or not in public school. It was not even AAPI history, but it was human communications in my first year of college. And being given words to describe community, that, like, I was 18 when I first heard the words individualism versus collectivism. That's a part of like Asian American communities, and having vocabulary like that to kind of dissect the differences between American and Asian American identities and how they can clash and where they overlap. Having that vocabulary was something that was really important to me, to express how I felt or to express my frustration with how I was being educated about my identity. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I would definitely add on that for me, I personally am Vietnamese American. And you know, what you do learn about Vietnam is like the Vietnam War. And that's about it. You know, you don't really learn much about Vietnamese culture other than the fact that we fought a war. And I mean, after World War II, right, we were doing well. And then Vietnam War was kind of like where we started, as a nation, we started to tank. And in school, you don't really learn that much about AAPI history. What you might learn, especially if you do like APUSH, for example, like even in school, your extent of like really understanding and knowing things, you'll learn about Japanese internment camps. But the thing that you learn is that, okay, people were moved into internment camps and then they were reimbursed in a sense with money. And you don't really talk about too much other than, yes, you do, depending on your school, you might talk about the court cases that are involved, but most schools don't. And that's where there's this sense of disconnect. And we only talk about trauma when it comes to the API community, especially in the public education system, because we fail to see the importance of including and celebrating API successes and accomplishments. Like in school, I didn't learn about Patsy Mink. I didn't learn about Yuri Kochiyama. You know, I didn't learn about all of these different parts and really notable API figures. I learned that outside of school. And I think what that really says is that school is kind of like our second home. You spend a lot of time in school, right? Like throughout your childhood, you also learn a lot of your morals through interactions too. And if you grow up in a space where that's not really a priority, then you disassociate yourself in a sense with certain aspects. For example, that's why you can also see a sense of apoliticism, even though that also is intertwined and connected with like immigrant parents potentially, or just culturally. But in general, if you don't see Asians and Pacific Islanders represented in your history, then that also fuels other issues outside, much further than we think, right? We're saying, okay, we might not be representing something in school. They can still learn outside. But by not making it an integral part of school, it makes it difficult for students who are API students, right, to feel like they're a part of the community. It makes it difficult to recognize that Asians have been here for a very long time. Like, a lot of people make that note that, yes, it's true. We had a really large immigration wave, like 1960s, but Asians are here for a very long time. And by not talking about how there are different races in our community and sticking very strictly to a Black and white narrative is also problematic, you know? And for me, just not seeing myself really represented in any light that was positive, other than the fact that, you know, just through different wars or colonization, like Julia was talking about with Burma, like, what does that say to all of the API students? Oh, we only include you in our history when, well, when your ethnicity, when an Asian country does something or is affiliated with us, but we don't include you directly in the narrative of being part of our community. And that also goes into like racial triangulation and all of that, which we can talk about later. But that's what I would say with the education system, is that in a sense, it's broken in a lot of ways, but in terms of AAPI history, it failed to really represent what it needed to represent.
Okay, so I think I was fortunate in the sense that if we're only talking about APUSH, which I took in 11th grade, our teacher was he made every single effort to include people of color, and just like back to what Nan said, everything that we learn about people of color in like APUSH seems to be like seems to tie to like trauma and a bad thing. But he would talk about our teacher, who's just the best. He just went far and beyond what any like public school teacher could do, and he would have done more, but it's AP, so he had to stick to like a curriculum design thing. But we did learn about I don't remember the name, but there was this World War II veteran who was Japanese, and he got like his arm cut off, and he just single-handedly defended like an entire, anyways, he was very excited to tell us about that. And he had a bookshelf of books written by authors of color, and he let people borrow them. So I borrowed A Making of Asian America by Erica Lee, and that was just very helpful. And he knew that he couldn't talk that in depth about things while he had to stick to an AP curriculum thing, but he made every effort for us to educate ourselves, and he pushed books on us. He gave us resources, and I think I was very fortunate in that aspect, because I didn't go to like maybe a typical public school. So yeah. I don't know what else I wanted to say. Besides that class, everything else I know about Asian Americans mostly self-learned, because I mean, that seems to be what we have to do, because a lot of, like you guys said, what we see in class is negative and nothing about the culture. Because yeah, push aside, world history, nothing much about any other Asian country besides like China. And yeah, I remember world history. Of course, you can't expect much from world history, but like, yeah, it was just China and Japan, and that was it. Nothing South Asia or Southeast Asia. A lot of stuff was just overlooked, and these students just don't see themselves represented. Or it's not even about representation, like just wanting your peers or your friends to know that there is stuff beyond the conflicts, the wars, and just, yeah. Again, yeah, I think I was fortunate. We did have a teacher who just made a lot of effort, and I think a lot of it doesn't even, I think a lot of it lies on the teachers. So if we have good teachers, like even mine, he needed to stick to a curriculum, but he managed to give us things, give us resources, and I think we all came out okay. Like none of our classmates are like racists or anything. Like, yeah, we all came out educated and aware that there is a world outside of what we're taught, and there are things that we need to keep an open mind about. And yeah, I think it all the curriculum doesn't even matter. If you have a teacher who wants to make the effort, they will. And that's what I think we need. More teachers who are aware and actually love history. Yeah, he's just a history buff. And again, I'm not even going to talk about like pay raises for teachers because that's just a whole nother thing. But yeah, Asian teachers, people of color in teaching positions, that is something we also need to work towards.
Yeah, there were such important like points that were brought up that about like war and like colonization that I learned from in my like last 2 to 3 years of high school, that I wish I was like you could talk more like in a successful moment with like Asian culture rather than like all like the terrors and everything that were brought to. So to continue this topic, how can students advocate to include more API empowerment, positive narratives, and celebration of API successes in schools' teaching of history?
I guess I'll go again, but I just think it's before you get to like high school, people just don't take you seriously. I was gonna say like if you have like a considerate teacher who actually wants everyone to learn about the different aspects of American history or anything, you could just tell them. But before a certain point, they just don't take you seriously. So I would just say self-education is the way to go. Read up on things yourself, tell your classmates about it. Yeah, just self-education and things that people just may not know about history, like how this is what our teacher taught us about Japanese internment camps. The main background of those was that there were a lot of Japanese farmers in California who were doing very well for themselves with Japanese farming techniques, and they had their own, they were making lots of money. So the white farmers got mad and they petitioned the government to do Japanese internment camps. And then they used World War II as like they just used World War II as an excuse, and they put Japanese Americans in the internment camps, and just the farmers were there too, and then their farms were lost, their land was just given out to other people, and we don't learn about that. We just say that the American government, blah blah blah, Pearl Harbor, and then they just put Japanese people in internment camps. But I think there are a lot of little nuances to history, and nothing is as black and white as it seems. And there's gray area, and there's also things that we don't learn that we need to take it upon ourselves to educate other people and ourselves too.
Yeah, I think I wanted to add on to that as well, that when we talk about specifically advocating for more of that empowerment, it is easiest to do it through your own personal teachers because you have that connection with them. Whereas if you're talking to like admin or like administration, like your school's administration, if you don't talk to them regularly, it's hard to communicate properly, especially. So what I do recommend for anyone who does want to promote it more is to talk to their teachers. And if you are in school and you are maybe in high school or middle school, I would say high school is maybe a little bit easier to facilitate that. But if you talk to like your history teachers over the years, kind of get their consensus, their thoughts on it. And over time, if you also get enough people interested in it, then you have like the power of people and voices. So then it's not as daunting because you're not by yourself. You have people who agree this is important. And that's also why, if you're really interested in getting more of that representation and celebrating more about AAPI culture specifically, it starts really within your own social bubbles. It starts with getting your friends involved, interested. Oh, what's like XYZ about, right? And what's all of this about? And how does it pertain to me? How does it pertain to you? And through that, when more people understand and start really comprehending why it's important to celebrate these different aspects of AAPI culture, right, then we can move towards more firm action, I would say, or like hard action in getting it to be more long lasting. And I also know a good amount of schools do like an Asian festival or like an Asian night. So that's also something that students had to push for. It's not something that's like, I would say, normal, like it's not your quintessential event, but students have pushed for it before. So that means that if other people can push for it, you know, and set that precedent, then you can too. And it's going to be daunting and difficult, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
I think that's so exciting. I'm in my 4th year of college. I don't know where you guys are in your education, but I think it's so exciting that realizing now that students before me had to have that will to kind of not fight, but fight the admin on certain things that they wanted celebrated. And we had some Asian American celebrations and kind of an acknowledgement of Lunar New Year and Chinese New Year. So I realized that meant that students before me had to have advocated for that. And I think what everyone's saying, what Athena and Nan are saying, sound completely right. It just starts with that curiosity and just not suppressing that curiosity, because there is a part of your brain maybe when you're 14 that's like, I'm curious about this, but this is kind of lame, or I don't want to talk to my friends about this, which is so, it sounds dumb saying it out loud, but it's real, because there's a part of, I mean, at that age you want to be cool and you want to fit in, but you're also allowed to have that curiosity, and you'd be surprised how everyone around you is curious, but they're just too afraid to start that conversation. So honestly, you don't even need to, it starts with the curiosity and that self-education, but you could also just go up to a friend or to a teacher about something that's happening in the news or something that happened in your own culture's history and ask, what is this? This is weird. I don't get it. Do you get it? And either they might know more and fill you in, or you could research together, or they could just go, I don't know either. And you could join forces and educate yourselves that way. I think that's so powerful. And I never really did that until college, because I didn't want to be weird and ask people about history. And I think if I did ask my friends or classmates about things I was curious about while I was in high school, I think I would have stronger relationships and stronger connections, and maybe have bonded with more people over our shared history. And what was I going to say about what? So could you repeat the question again, Marinelle? It was about student advocacy.
Yeah, I can repeat the question. So it says, how can students advocate to include more API empowerment, positive narratives, and celebration of API successes in schools' teaching of history?
Okay, you said in schools specifically. I think this isn't about schools, this is about social media, but I've become part of this really great community on TikTok that shares their history. And a lot of my For You page will be full of just like my just Asian American or Pacific Islander friends sharing parts of their culture, whether it be traditional dress or food or language or fun facts about history that we might have not known. And I think that is that being on TikTok over the course of quarantine has been a huge educational resource. And it's interesting because these people are telling their own stories. It's not not that it isn't great, but it's not a white professor or teacher teaching me about my own or my friend's own culture and history. And it's been such a really positive community. Like, I just felt like doing this in the middle of quarantine, but there is something called Tanaka in Burmese culture that's kind of this wood that is ground on stone and it turns into this paste that you can use as skincare or like a natural sunscreen that Burmese people have used for centuries. And I just felt like sharing it. I didn't think that anyone would really care, or I don't know if it would quote unquote reach a lot of people or blow up and interest anyone, but people were so receptive to it and they were so curious and interested and sharing, oh, I had something similar in my culture. And that was something that was a smaller community within itself and being part of this educational TikTok community as well. So I think that you don't need to be limited to school because there are so many restrictions, like teachers being, teachers just not caring or it's just not part of the curriculum. But there's so much out there, this Instagram and TikTok, and I've met amazing friends who care about the same things that I care about and like discussing things like history and culture. And I've only met them because of social media. So I think if you have that passion and that curiosity and you find out something amazing and you don't have anyone to talk to about it, there is definitely an audience somewhere who will want to hear what you have to say. So
Yeah, I think what you guys just mentioned, like, it's really informative, and I haven't learned about that much. So thank you for sharing. Our next topic for this panel is self-education in both the API community and the API allies community. And just a heads up, we are running short on time. So if everyone could keep their responses under a minute, that would be great.
To start us off, what are some ways that students can educate themselves about API topics in general? How should they approach this, and how can we educate ourselves on lesser known stories of the Asian and Pacific Islander community?
There are a lot of ways. The most direct way, I would say, and the easiest way, in my opinion, is Google. Really, Google is your best friend. And even though it's nice to be able to hear people, which you obviously can do, like even right now, right? You can go to events, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch videos, documentaries, do what you want, do as you please. And most of it, you find it on the internet, right? And Google, I can't stress this enough. Like, the internet is where you find a lot of your resources. It's this hub of information where you can learn so much about different people's cultures, people's practices, and you yourself are able to get that information very quickly, but also through learning about it online, you can also cross-reference, there's also that sense of perspective that you can take into account, all of these extra things that you can do, and all of it's through a medium of the internet. And I genuinely think that's one of the best ways to educate yourself.
I was gonna say, let's start by being able to differentiate between Asian countries and knowing that it is not just East Asia. But yeah, I think the internet is just a great place to learn in a way that you actually don't feel like you're learning. And I mean that you could listen to music in a different language, you can listen to a podcast. It doesn't have to be like reading up on history.com or something. You can do, I'm Chinese American. My parents sent me to Chinese day school, but it didn't work. I didn't learn Chinese that way. So I was watching I would just listen to Chinese music and watch Chinese shows, and that's how I learned Chinese. But yeah, there's a lot of different resources online, and I would just say find something that you like and then dive deep into it and then look at it. You could listen to music. I said that already. Music in different languages. Just find a genre you like, and then there's also Instagram accounts. I'm gonna give us a quick plug, Angry Asian Americans. But yeah, there you have to be careful to find a place if you're gonna learn about the culture, do it from the person's perspective. So if you're gonna follow an activist account, make sure there's the members are diverse, they're not actually like white people or something. And then yeah, make sure they're actually Asian and they know what they're talking about. Yeah, and just empathy and just being able to talk to Asian friends and like be like curious but like not want to alienate them, and just yeah, I'm gonna keep it short because we're running short on time apparently.
I think Athena brings up a great point. Finding your entry point into like that, letting your curiosity run wild, I suppose. I think something else that is great is I was just always curious about it as a kid, but and I was fortunate enough to grow up with my grandparents who also raised me. But I would just sit there and just be like, I call my grandma Amma, so I could just be like, Amma, can you tell me about this again? And then every time, and she's told me the same stories and like different variations of it, and then remembering details and then leaving out details. What about like running from war or from a certain like political period in Myanmar or China? And you can ask your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and uncles. If I know sometimes it's an awkward conversation because sometimes you just coexist with your family, but I think to break that boundary and then get that primary research, but the stories firsthand from your family can be really really helpful, and instead of studying them, I suppose, which is also important, but you can also get a subjective point of view because they were there. um I think that's another way you can educate yourself and also like break down those boundaries that Asian Americans have with their family and like that intergenerational struggle. um I think stories are really powerful and healing in that sense. So I think that's another way, that great way you can educate yourself. Also, yeah, what Athena said, movies were how I basically learned Burmese growing up and learned the culture and the humor and the little nuances. So finding your entry point, being curious, and asking people to tell their stories, and maybe you telling your own as well.
Yeah, these are good ideas. Our next question is, how can we motivate students to become more curious and involved in educating themselves on API education? And are there any resources or platforms you suggest for people to use to educate themselves on API issues and history?
This kind of ties in with the last question, but I just wanted to add that experiencing the culture is different from learning it, and experiencing it is a whole different feeling, because you can read up on something as much as you want, but it'll never be the same as feeling it for yourself. And this also answers this question, which is, if we're talking about non-Asian friends, just take them to your family events or something. I don't know. But yeah, feeling the culture for yourself is just, it's a completely different feeling. And yeah, I would just say, yeah, books, movies, things. And also, if we're talking about like activism and history, um, prominent Asian authors, Erica Lee, she writes a lot of books about Asian history. Um, yeah, just there's so much on the internet. You can just, all within reach if you're just curious enough to go look for it. So there's activism accounts on Instagram. There are people who speak on stuff on TikTok. Um, yeah, everything is within reach if you just go look for it.
And usually if you spend enough time on one platform, then you're going to be exposed to other things. Like, for example, a lot of people get stuck in the model minority myth. Like, they start there and then they stop there. But if you actually learn a good amount about it, you're going to see that it is connected to other things. And then if you just continue down that tunnel of like learning different things, then you're going to be exposed to more things. And unfortunately, I would say that that curiosity doesn't come from other people. You have to be self-motivated to learn that. But what you can do to push people towards that direction is that exposure, right? At least having people know that these are some interesting topics to maybe look up on. And if you have that first exposure, then maybe it will push them towards that direction. And if you talk about your culture as well, maybe people will be like, huh, that sounds kind of interesting too. And then they might do their research on that. But really, it does come down to that person and if they're truly interested in it too.
Let's talk about the power of a DM or an email. If when it comes to like those resources on Instagram, but also looking up professors from any like a college that you're about to go to or a college you're interested in. Professors, I took as an elective a lot of Asian American studies classes, and that came that it's not part of my curriculum or it's not a requirement at all, but I wanted to learn more. And these professors are just so ready to give recommend books and resources, and they have all these documentaries and articles that they're passionate about and what we studied in class, but they just want to have conversations. And if you feel like you're lacking that sense of community or you don't have anyone to talk to, email a professor somewhere who's like the head of Asian American studies or in your city or in your state or globally. It's just the internet. Use the internet. It's a magical tool that we have to connect with other people and connect you with so many resources. And don't be afraid to use it, and don't be afraid of people. And just introduce yourself. Hi, I'm a student. I'm curious about this, and I saw that you teach this. I'd love to learn more about it. If you have any recommendations or what your opinion on, I'd love to talk to you over email or over Zoom. And you'd be surprised how many people are down or how many people are waiting for that connection or waiting for someone to take the initiative. So that's what I would recommend. Stuck or curious.
Yeah, okay, so this wraps our panel questions for the Reimagining Education about Asian and Pacific Islander History panel. We will now be going over some questions from our audience.
So the first question is, what can non-API people use their voices to aid other non-API people with educating themselves, and when should they remain silent? Are there certain places where the discrimination was more insensitive?
I think that was a very loaded question, but I'll start with talking specifically on, allyship and when to speak and when to not. So typically, as an ally, just the pure definition of it is to amplify people's voices, speak up on it, but speak up in the sense of amplifying people's voices and like letting people know that there is an issue, but where you stop is that you don't speak for the community. You have not experienced it. You're not the person to speak on it. And you may be the person to speak on it for other issues, right, and on other topics, but if that does not pertain to you, if the issue does not really pertain to you or your community or something that directly relates you to it, I highly recommend speaking up about the problem, but not speaking on the problem itself.
I would just say that there's just loads of problems. Non-Asian or Pacific Islander people back to what I said. You just made all the points right there. You can like our culture, but don't fetishize us. Don't speak on issues that you aren't fully educated on. Don't speak over us. There's just allyship is very simple. It's just stand by us and appreciate our contributions and just don't do anything weird. It's quite simple, really. You have Asian friends, think about what they would I mean, there's just loads of things that you see on social media, like someone did some eyeliner and people like non-Asian people in the comments, Asian fishing, like, no, please don't leave comments, confrontational comments on like stuff about Asian issues if you're not Asian under people's comment sections. It's very simple. Just be nice, don't be weird, and appreciate Asian people and make form opinions for yourself and just don't listen to like everyone. Form opinions for yourself, educate yourself when given the chance. It's quite simple. Just, yeah, don't be weird.
I'm laughing at because how simple it is. It's just, I think, just extremely simplified when it comes to activism or social justice or social issues. People just want to be seen as human. We just want to be treated as human, considered as human. So there, it is hard to give a definite answer. Do this, do not do this, but just how would you want to be treated? I don't know. When the Asian hate crimes were kind of taking over the news more, there was just, I received a lot of support from non-Asian friends. I don't know what the fine line is. I felt there's a part of it that felt like coddling or just insincere or just, I don't know what it was, but just asking someone if they even want to talk about it or just being like more sensitive in that sense, and that your one Asian friend isn't the only resource you have about Asian history or Asian American current events. That maybe they might not want to be hounded about all the news and everything that's going on. And I think that even happens if you run an account that's dedicated to activism or social justice, or like I myself as a Burmese person, as soon as like the Burmese like military coup happened, I just got a flood of people demanding that I speak on it today, right now, or else something. And just that one Asian American person or that one Burmese person is not a spokesperson for all things that happen to Asian American people or Burmese people or whatever it may be. So still seeing, just see us as human, just treat everyone as human. Like, hey, did you see this thing? I'm not going to force you to talk about it, but I was wondering what you thought, or if you even want to talk about it. I'm here for you. And something as simple as that, the way you talk to a friend, would be deeply appreciated.
Yeah, those are great responses. Aside from educating ourselves, what other actions can we take to show solidarity with the cause, and what can we do to help help educate others?
I think outside of self-education, right, of course, this is going to be talked about a little more in the next panel, but you can do a lot online. You can go to rallies, you can go to protests, you can sign petitions, you can go to events just like this one, right? And by actively partaking in these different aspects, you are learning, but you're also taking a stance that you are here to support the community, that you are here to learn, and that you are keeping an open mind. So solidarity comes in a lot of forms, right? And it doesn't always look the same for everyone because everyone's situation is different. But if you put the effort into it, like genuine effort, and if you do care about it, and if you do take time and effort just to ensure that one extra step, maybe just even in your local community, you don't have to go super far out, you don't need to be doing something that like impacts the entire country. It doesn't even have to impact your entire state. Start with your local area. What can you do to make a difference, right? And once you start to see, oh, here are some issues that we might want to think about, then only then, once we actually see those problems, and we can start the conversation and start making solutions.
I don't really have much to say on this. Non hit all the topics. Yeah, just solidarity. I don't know if the question meant for non-Asian people, but solidarity, just like back to what Julia said in the previous question, just treat us like people, have empathy, connect with us like humans, like treat us how you would treat a friend. It's really that simple. Yeah, I just want to say, like, we do place a lot of we do place a lot of emphasis on our identity, but that is not our complete like personality. We have personality beyond our race. And although culture does play into a lot of how I feel and who I am as a person, it's just like, just talk to me like you would talk to anybody else, just be empathetic, be sensitive, and just talk to us like you would talk to anyone else. It's just that simple. I don't remember what the question was anymore, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Those are great points, Son and Athena.
Yeah, so this is the last question that our panelists will have time to answer. We hope that this panel helped you learn more about education surrounding the API community, as well as how you can become a better ally to the API community.
Thank you so much once again for attending our education panel, and thank you so much to Julia, Nan, Athenia, our wonderful panelists, for helping us to teach our communities about education and API history, self-education, and as well as to resolve the anti-Asian hate, semitism.
Yeah, so our next section will be interactive, more specifically a Kahoot with questions surrounding the topics that our panelists just discussed.
Please remember to stay until the end of session 1, which ends at 12:20 p.m. Pacific Time, Standard Time, for a chance to be entered in a giveaway for a book written by a NY Times best-selling API author.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you girls so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I learned a lot. Bye, guys.
Thank you for this conversation. It was great talking to all of you.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our first session of the Standby AAPI conference. My name is Dorothy, a co-project director at Tester Magazine.
And my name is Claire, the co-founder and co-CEO of Gen Z We Are the Future. And we are going to be moderating the next session of our conference, which will be a Kahoot that will test your knowledge on the topics discussed by our wonderful speakers.
So when you're ready, join the game using the code that you see on your screen. We recommend joining on a separate device that you're not using to watch the stream with.
Okay, we can go ahead and get started. You can still join if you want later. We are having a few technical difficulties right now, but we will get started soon. Okay. Okay, let's get started. Great job, guys.
Yeah, glad to see that a majority of you got this correct. And that concludes our Kahoot. Thank you so much for attending our interactive session for our first block of the conference despite our technical difficulties. We'll now be going on a lunch break, but we'll be back at 1:30 Pacific time or 4:30 Eastern time for our activism panel. So be sure to join us at our next session where you'll hear our panelists discuss ways that you can get involved in activism. So once again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope you attend our next session.